Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Thirsty for a cup of holiday fear? Itching to get into the holiday spirit? Or become one? Well, nestle yourselves by your fireplaces and settle in for a Christmas concoction that Doughboy420 likes to call Fleshy, the Snowman.
It was the day before Christmas, and little Sammy had been good all year round. He had made sure to do everything that he could to see to it that he was good, even going out of his way to do things for others so that Santa would see how good he was and bring him the one gift that he so desperately wanted for Christmas: a G3000 Gatling dart blaster. It had a 500-round drum clip, which would unload a lot quicker than you would think. Firing an astonishing 2 rounds per second, you could empty the entire magazine within just a few minutes. Sammy had quite the collection of toy dart guns, and he was pretty proud of it. However, the G3000 was the one that eluded him, mostly because of the toy's $350 price tag. That was something that his parents could never possibly afford. But Santa and his elves, they could do anything. So, Sam figured that maybe if he was good for the whole entire year, that maybe, just maybe, Santa would finally bring him that gun. Unfortunately for Sammy, though, his family didn't seem to care as much about their behavior as he did. David, Sam's dad, was a stereotypical used car salesman. You know the type. Sure of themselves and nice on the lot, but in reality, they're rigging your car to fall apart after the warranty expires and scheming to con you out of every penny that they can. He wasn't much different at home either. Aside from the fact that behind the closed doors of his own home, he didn't have to act like the nice guy to sell you his bullshit. He just did what he wanted, and no one questioned him. Kimberly, Sammy's mom, was very kind to her children, that is, when she was paying attention to them. The vast majority of her time was spent shopping for things that she didn't need and couldn't afford. But thanks to the wonders of credit cards and the anonymity of online shopping, she could buy whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. So, Sammy had assumed that she would buy him the G3000 for his birthday. Nope. Instead, he got a discounted video game for his system that he didn't even own. Sam's mom bought plenty of things, but very seldomly thought of anyone but herself. Sam was the youngest of 4 children. Darren was the oldest at 25 years old and had already moved out and gotten a job working in the city for some big company. But he was now back for the holidays with his wife. He got married to Lauren not long after moving to the city, and, like father, like son. He married a gold digger that didn't really give a squat about him, only about what he could give her. She was a stereotypical blonde valley girl that couldn't tell you what 25 plus 47 was, but could tell you exactly what happened on last week's episode of the latest reality TV show. Then there was Katie. She was 16 years old and was always slumping around the house. She never went outside, and she wore all black. Black shoes, black shirt, black jeans. She even dyed her hair jet black. She was an emo teenager, always complaining about how cruel her suburban, white girl life was, frequently locking herself in her bedroom to listen to death metal. Finally, there was Randy, Sam's 13-year-old brother. He was always a jerk to Sammy and treated him more like a kid to a bully at school than he did his own brother. The two had no respect for each other, and for good reason. Randy was quite cruel to his little brother, always giving him noogies and wet willies. The jerk would even steal the poor kid's lunch money before school, causing him to go hungry. Like I said, a bully. Even though Sammy's family was a pretty unhappy lot to be around, they were totally ungrateful for anything he did for them. Sam would still do everything they asked, and it had been hell for him the entire year.
I swear, if Mom asks me to scrub another toilet, or if Dad asks me to shovel the driveway, or if I have to endure one more darn noogie from Randy, I'm going to lose my mind.
Sammy said to himself as he sat on the edge of his bed, waiting for the next command to come from his demanding family. He wanted to yell. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them to all go screw themselves, but he knew that he couldn't. If he wasn't good, Santa wouldn't bring him the G3000. Then he heard it.
Sammy, honey, can you come down here, please?
His mother's voice called from downstairs.
Yeah, just a second.
Sam yelled out of his door to his mother before sighing in discontent. He then gathered his composure and reminded himself of his goal, before making his way out into the hallway and downstairs, where he found his mother preparing dinner in the kitchen.
Yeah, Mom?
Young Sam asked.
Hey, can you go down into the pantry and get me some jars of cranberry sauce? Forgot to grab them when I was down there earlier.
Sam's mom asked.
Aw, Mom, you know I don't like it down there.
Sammy whined.
Come on, I'll be right up here and it's just a basement. It will be okay. You will be fine. Can you please go get them?
His mother asked again.
But Mom...
Sam began, but was quickly interrupted.
Samuel David, you get your butt down there and get me those jars, or I will have to get your father in here,
his mother said in a stern tone. He knew that once his mom threw in his middle name and threatened to get Dad involved, that things had gotten serious, indicating that he had better do as he was told. Sam opened the basement door and stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, where he took in a few deep breaths.
Go on, get going,
his mother commanded, urging him onward. Sammy reached into the basement and flicked on the dim lights of the cellar below. He then slowly walked downward into the cold cellar. He looked around as more and more of the basement came into view. The walls consisted of large stones that had been stacked into place, and the floor was just dirt, just the cold earth beneath his feet when he reached the bottom of the old wooden steps. Little Sam rounded the corner and, at the bottom of the stairs, made his way back around, toward where the pantry was. He opened the wooden door and stepped into the clean, stone floor of the pantry before reaching up to grab a couple of jars of cranberry sauce, like his mom had asked. He exited the pantry and kicked the door closed behind him. In the process of clumsily kicking the pantry door, Sammy had stumbled a bit and knocked an old stack of dusty boxes onto the floor, kicking up a large cloud of dust and dirt into the air. Sam coughed a bit, attempting to cover his face with the 2 jars in his hands. After the dust cleared, Sammy set the jars down onto a nearby table before crouching down to pick up the things that he had knocked over. It was then that he saw a small, rectangular metal surface, half hidden behind a few more boxes. Inquisitively, Sam slid the boxes out of the way to reveal a small, iron door that was set into the stone wall. Sammy ran his fingers along the edge of the door. It didn't appear to have a handle, but he was very curious as to what was hidden inside. He tried to find a hidden switch, tapping here and there. Then finally, he pushed on each side until he heard a click, and the little door opened about 1/4 of an inch. Sam gripped the edge of the cold metal door and slowly swung it open so that he could peer inside. Beyond the door was a little cubbyhole area, just a few feet on each side, forming a perfectly square, metal box on the other side. On the floor of this safe-like tiny room sat a pile of old papers. Many of them were yellowed, with torn edges, as if they had been ripped from some old book. Sammy retrieved a few of these pieces of paper from the floor and looked at them. They appeared to be parts of old Christmas stories.
A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
Sam read from one page.
The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen.
He continued on another page. These were old pages from some kind of book of Christmas stories. There were also some old, knotted twigs that appeared very brittle and long dead, along with brown pine needles that had fallen away and now lay scattered about. Finally, sitting amongst the pine twigs and papers, was a single, little, red pouch. It was covered in dust and pine needles and appeared to be tucked away beneath the papers. Sammy put the papers back down on top of the pile and retrieved the little pouch from its hiding place. It had a little crimson rope that slid into the rim of the bag in order to pull the bag closed at the top. Sam turned the bag over and inspected the other side to find an old, black, leather emblem sewn into the side of the bag. The leather was cracked and it crumbled away in little bits and places, but the image it formed was still very clearly that of a snowman. The typical small ball placed onto a larger ball, placed onto an even larger ball design, all topped off with a top hat and what Sammy could only assume was the remnants of a half-crumbled away carrot nose. Sam pulled at the bag's openings to loosen the velvet red rope that was slid through them. The bag opened with a small cloud of dust and the musty yet minty smell of something very old that escaped from the darkness inside. Young Sam reached into the bag and felt around inside before retrieving something from within. It was an old mistletoe, a real, living mistletoe. Sammy looked at the small twig with leaves and berries within his hand with confusion. Everything else within the room was dead and old. Even the bag in which the mistletoe was stored showed signs of heavy aging. But the mistletoe that was found within was in perfect condition. The leaves even still appeared to have moisture within them.
Samuel, get up here this instant!
Sam was startled by the sound of his mother yelling for him and absent-mindedly returned the twig to its pouch before sliding it into his pocket. He then hastily pushed the door closed and slid the boxes that he had knocked over back in front of it so that it was hidden once again, before grabbing the 2 jars and trotting quickly back upstairs.
What took you so long?
Sam's mother asked.
Sorry, Mom, I kicked some boxes over and...
Sam started.
You better not have made a mess down there. You know how your father is.
His mother interrupted.
Don't worry, I cleaned everything up. That's why I was down there so long.
Sammy said, telling his mother only a half-truth.
All right, well, go on and go play with your friends. I have to get ready for everyone to arrive.
His mother said. She was preparing for the arrival of several other family members who would be staying for the holidays. Sammy nodded and left the room, passing his father in the living room. He grabbed his coat and was about to head out the door when his father stopped him. I heard you talking to your mother about making a mess in the basement. His father grumbled from his recliner, his face turned toward the TV and back to his son.
Yeah, I cleaned it up, though,
Sam said. If you weren't such a klutz, it wouldn't have happened in the first place, his father said to him before taking a big gulp out of his bottle of beer.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Sam said, looking downward. Well, at least you cleaned it up. You might be clumsy, but you're not a dimwit, he said with a smile on his face. The son of mine's gonna be stupid, he added.
Thanks,
Sammy said, not knowing what to say to a comment like that. Damn straight. Of course you ain't an idiot. You're my son. I didn't raise no fool, he said, proud of himself, sipping on his beer again.
May I go out and play?
Sammy asked. What was that? His father said in response.
May I go out and play, sir?
Sam said coyly. Yes, you may. Make sure you're back before dark, or you'll get a whooping, his father replied.
Yes, sir.
Sam said before exiting the house. After shutting the door behind him, Sam began walking toward the park, his hands in his pockets and his head pointed down. As he made his way down the sidewalk, his mother's words rang through his head.
Go play with your friends.
Friends.
He thought to himself. Most of his friends were away for the holidays, and the ones that weren't lived on the other side of town. He wouldn't see them again until after the winter break and everyone was back at school. The boy sighed as the winter air chilled his skin. Sam didn't even make it down the block before he sighed again and turned around to go back home. If he was going to be miserable, he figured he may as well be warm. However, just as soon as Sammy had made it to his driveway, he heard the sound of a loud diesel engine pull up behind him before a large truck moved past him and up onto the curb. This was followed by an old 1970s station wagon that pulled into the driveway, blocking Sam's mother's car and any chance for escape. Before Sammy knew it, a whole mess of people poured out of the two vehicles. His port, a balding man wearing a flannel jacket yelled after getting out of the driver's seat of the large truck. It was Sam's Uncle Chet, who was a typical right-wing Republican, full-on red state, and proud of his new home away from here in the Bible Belt of America. Aside from his brother, Sam's father, no one in the family was really too fond of the guy. They all put up with him because he was blood, even if he believed that the government was hiding proof of Jesus Christ's existence at Area 51.
Hi, Uncle Chet.
Sammy said, unenthusiastically. His wife Brenda jumped out of the truck after him with her usual attitude, yelling at him and poking a finger at his chest. The woman was obviously drunk, and Sammy couldn't pin down one specific thing that the woman was angry about because, between obscenities and insults, she had a new complaint with every breath. Their two children, Billy Joe, their 17-year-old daughter, and Buddy, their 15-year-old son, both of whom wanted nothing to do with Sammy, just glanced his way and continued into the house without even saying a word. Billy Joe only really got along with Sam's older sister, Katie, and Buddy, in turn, only hung out with Randy, which left Sam the odd man out during holiday get-togethers. Finally, there were his grandparents that had arrived in the old station wagon.
Goodness gracious, you have grown quite a bit since the last time I saw you. When was that?
Sam's grandma, Gertrude, said.
Hi, Grandma.
Sam said.
I don't know since my birthday, I think.
He replied to his grandma.
Oh my. Well, will you help your grandpa with the bags, please? I have to go and make sure your mother isn't burning the turkey.
Grandma Gertrude's demeanor changed as she mentioned Sam's mother.
Hey, kiddo.
Sam's grandpa Seymour said.
Papa!
Sammy yelled as he ran over to hug his grandpa.
Come on, let's get inside.
Seymour said to his grandson, grabbing his bags and handing one to Sammy before trudging inside. The family was all together. Some of them were happy about it, while others were not. Hours passed, and everyone was settled in to spend the holidays together, even if that time spent felt as if everyone was walking on eggshells. The tensions between family members can be pretty heavy on the holidays, and Sam's family was no different. The tension was thick, like a fog that hung over top of their heads, ready to break like a water-laden storm cloud. Finally, it was time for all of them to sit down as a family to their first dinner together in quite a few months. The family sat all together at the table, but unfortunately for Sammy, he was sitting between the two people that had tormented him throughout his entire childhood, his brother and his cousin. Young Sam had endured a good 15 minutes of his brother and his cousin poking and prodding at his sides under the table, tickling him and hurting him when the food was finally served. Everyone got their plates and their own portions of food. Ham, cranberry sauce, stuffing, banana bread, noodle casserole, along with an apple and pecan pies for dessert. To drink, everyone had a choice between soda or eggnog, with the option of a little whiskey added for the adults. However, with the dangerous concoction of alcohol and family tensions, it was only a matter of time before the volcano finally blew and erupted into a spew of broken Christmas presents and angry screaming, just like it had every year before. Then, finally, it happened when Uncle Chet dumped the religion vinegar into the baking soda volcano that was Sam's gothic sister, Katie.
"You know," he said, "this is Jesus' birthday. I don't understand why you even celebrate it when you don't believe in God,"
he continued, eliciting a disgusted sigh and roll of the eyes from Katie.
"What, am I wrong?"
he added, with a bit of an attitude.
"Actually, Uncle Chet,"
Katie grumbled,
"there are around 30 different holidays celebrated by several different religions around this time of year, and many of them have customs similar to those that we celebrate on Christmas."
Katie replied to him,
"I can't wait for you liberals to see what the president has in store for you."
Chet then yelled at her. It was then at that moment that the entire table erupted into one massive argument about religion and politics, with everyone on different sides of the spectrum of the conversation. Brother against brother, cousin against cousin, father against daughter, mother against son, and everyone against everyone. But little Sammy decided to quietly slip away before people started throwing things and breaking stuff. Upstairs, Sam sat on the edge of his bed and looked out the window beside him, his eyes scanning across the starry night sky.
I wish all this would stop.
Young Sammy sighed to himself before climbing into bed to read a comic book and drift slowly off to sleep. Sammy shot awake at the sound of a loud thumping, a thumping that at first he believed to be the coming of Santa Claus. But then the young boy realized that the thuds were not coming from the roof overhead, but rather from outside of his bedroom window. Sam jumped out of bed, terrified by what could be at his window. There were no trees on that side of the house, and his room was on the second floor. There was no way that anyone could possibly be at his window. The young boy jumped in fright as he approached the frosted-over window. Then the boy screamed in terror as he saw the source of the sound. It was his cousin Billy Joe. Her frozen, lifeless body hung from the neck by several strands of still blinking, multicolored Christmas lights. Her corpse was blowing in the wind against the side of the house, just outside of Sammy's bedroom window. The boy ran out of his room and into the hallway where his nightmare continued. There, scattered across the hallway floor and tacked onto the walls, were little gingerbread men, cookie cutouts. Some of them were complete and some of them with bites taken out of them. Their source lay at the end of the hall, just outside of Sam's room. It was his Aunt Brenda, and the cookie cutouts were bits of ripped skin and masses of flesh, all strewn about the hall, with a trail of blood in their wake. Sammy's eyes filled with tears as his heart raced in terror. He ran past his aunt and downstairs into the living room, but the horror was not over. The Christmas tree was soaked with blood, and hung from the branches of the pine were eyeballs, fingers, and toes. Each was hung with fishing hooks stuck through them, resembling disgusting ornaments on the tree. Along with this, several yards of intestines wrapped around the pine like strands of garland, all of the morbid decorations dripping blood and gore down onto the colorfully wrapped presents below. The one whom these body parts belonged to was made evident when Sammy looked upward towards the top of the tree, where his father's head was impaled on the star topper, the upper point of the star sticking out of a hollow socket where his left eye had once been. Sam burst into tears at the sight of his father's innards strewn across the Christmas tree, but it was then, frozen in terror, he heard a kind of ethereal laughter from the other side of the room. Sammy's eyes shot over toward where the creepy laughter was coming from. Then he saw it. There, on the other side of the room, stood a monstrous creature. The thing that he saw was the shape of a snowman, but it was not made out of snow. Instead, the monster was made up of scraps of rotting meats and rolled into 3 balls to create a triple-layered form of the snowman. The monster left a trail behind it like a slug, but instead of the thing's slime, there was a trail of coagulated blood, pieces of steak, sausages, and bits of gore, and human flesh that had added to itself, making itself even larger than it once had originally been. Sammy watched, frozen in terror, as the monster stuffed the severed hand of a girl into the blood-soaked stocking hung over the tree. It was a hand with black nail polish, revealing it to be Sam's sister's hand. She was the only one in his family to wear black nail polish, and he could only assume that the other 3 stockings that hung, filled, dripping with blood, were also stuffed full with parts of his sister. It was then that the creature noticed Sammy and turned to face him, revealing the hollowed-out eyes, like black holes sunk into the thing's skull-like face. It had a long, rotting carrot nose, just like a regular snowman, along with a ragged, old top hat. But aside from the fleshy consistency, there were some other things very wrong with this creature. Its mouth was filled with rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth that curled inward towards its throat. The thing's arms were long, yellowed bones that stuck out from unnatural angles from the creature's bulbous sides, and set within the monster's stomach was a large metal door, like that of an old wood stove. Then, in an instant, Sam's mother rounded the corner. Without even a moment of thought, the creature snatched the poor woman up, leaving both her and Sammy screaming in absolute terror as the oven door within the creature's chest burst open to reveal the raging fire within, a raging fire that Sam's mother was then stuffed violently into. The thing slammed the heavy metal door behind her, trapping her in the eternal flames within the belly of the beast. The room filled with smoke and the smell of burning flesh as Sammy's eyes again filled with tears. Quickly, the boy ran back upstairs, his feet barely touching each step as he bolted back to his room. Sammy intended to hide in his room and defend himself by shooting his way out with his dart guns if he had to. He knew it was a crazy idea, but he was so terrified, he couldn't think of any other rational escape. Sam hunkered down onto his bed, half using his blanket as a shield, half sticking out of the bed, aimed and ready with 2 large dart guns, along with several others hid beneath the blanket, ready to go. The boy sat there, shivering and shaking with fear, waiting for the beast to attack. Then he heard it. The same evil laughter that he had heard before, and it was accompanied by the sound of loud, slopping thuds as the fleshy snowman hopped up the stairs. Then, suddenly, a large round figure popped out from around the corner of the doorframe. Young Sam didn't even have time to think before he started firing the darts at the intruder, but he quickly stopped as he realized what he was shooting. It was his cousin Buddy, all wound up in wrapping paper. He was stuffed inside of a cocoon of Christmas wrapping paper that was white with little Santa Clauses printed all over it. Buddy's head was sticking out of the top with a bow stuck into his hair. Aside from the fact that Buddy was wrapped up like a Christmas present, there was something very off about him. His skin was completely pale, and he looked odd. The wrapping paper also seemed off. The bottom of it seemed to have been dyed red for some reason, and for a moment, Sammy was very confused. Very confused, that is, until the wrapping paper, which was compromised by the dart fire, ripped open even further, and a large pool of dismembered limbs, blood, and guts spilled out onto Sam's bedroom floor, leaving a bloody spine leading up to a head still hanging from the top of the wrapping paper bag. Sam let out a wailing scream as the monster then rounded the corner, bits and pieces of his cousin sliding and rolling across the floor to add themselves to the beast in the process. Suddenly, Sam unloaded everything that he had on the fleshy snowman, filling the rotten meat full of darts and actually breaking pieces of the creature away. The demon's laughs turned into grunts as his demeanor changed. Then, the beast ducked back out of sight and was gone once again. Sam's mouth dropped open with a sigh of relief and amazement. His crazy plan had actually worked in scaring the beast off, but his celebration was short-lived. He knew that he had to get out of the house and away from this thing. The young boy grabbed what guns he could, threw on his jacket and a pair of boots by his door, and ran as fast as he could down the stairs and out into the snow, into the darkness. However, the poor kid didn't make it very far before he was pelted in the side of the face with a rather large snowball. Sam turned, face cold and red, toward the direction that the assault had come from, ready to fire at his attacker, but there, down the sidewalk, stood his brother, laughing so hard that he could barely stand, having a great time at his brother's expense, without a care in the world, without even knowing that nearly their entire family had been slaughtered just minutes earlier.
Randy!
Sam yelled, both in delight and anger.
You should see your face,
Randy yelled through laughs, pointing at his brother's face.
You're okay.
Sam said with a sigh of relief.
Yeah. I was just over at my friend's house for a while. Why wouldn't I be okay?
Randy asked, confused by Sam's reaction to being hit with a snowball. Sam nearly burst into tears, but before he could explain the situation to his brother, the two of them were suddenly distracted as the Christmas lights to the house turned on once again. But now, they were different. Instead of being set up in the proper order, along the edges of the house like they normally would be, they were set up to go off in unison, to spell out a single message across the side of the house. The message started where their cousin Billy Joe was hanging by the neck, and consisted of several strands of lights that blinked in order of each word. Sammy read them out loud as they blinked on.
Please help me.
The words ended at the window of the guest bedroom, at the opposite end of the house where Sam's room was. Just as the Christmas lights reached the end of their message, the light within that room flicked on, and inside, Sammy could see his elderly grandfather, all tied up with red and green ribbons, with a little red bow stuck into his mouth. Even from that distance, Sammy could see the fear in his grandfather's eyes. Then, just as suddenly as the lights had turned on, all once again went dark. Out of the front door to the house came a burst of chilling wind, a wind that was unnaturally cold, even for that time of year. Then, the wind was followed by the sound of what both Sam and Randy thought was the sound of smashing glass. But they were soon shown that it was the sound of dozens of large icicles breaking free from the eaves of the house, headed straight their way. Little Sammy was able to jump out of the way, but when the young boy turned back to look at what had become of his brother, he saw the figure of his kin leaning backwards, looking like a pincushion. Randy had been impaled by several shards of ice, all shapes and sizes, including one very large one that now held him in place, suspending him over the ground, a large patch of crimson snow forming beneath him. Sammy quickly ran back inside of the house to attempt to rescue his grandfather, but once inside, the door slammed shut behind him, locking itself in place and cutting off his escape. The house was filled with the smell of Christmas dinner once again, and Sammy's eyes moved towards the dining room table, where he saw 2 people sitting there on each end. The young boy quickly ran to the table, but was horrified at the sight that he found. The 2 people sitting at the table were his eldest brother, Darren, and his wife. The 2 of them had been disemboweled with their innards spewed across the dinner table, mixed with the food that had been eaten earlier. The thought of not knowing blood from cranberry sauce made Sammy sick to his stomach, but he had to help his grandpa. Sam ran to the stairs, where he found his Uncle Chet lying at the base of them. His skin was covered with red burns and festering blisters, and all around him lay a pool of brown with little white marshmallows sprinkled throughout. The man had been burned to death by scalding hot cocoa. The poor child ran past his deceased uncle and upstairs, dart guns in hand. At the top of the stairs, Sammy ran down the hallway to the end of the house, where the guest bedroom was. He pushed the door open and quickly flicked on the light. Inside, Sammy was welcomed by the sight of his grandfather, tied up with ribbons, and on the other side of the room was the large, fleshy Snowman. The monster was consuming the face of his grandmother, biting and tearing off pieces of her head as the woman shrieked in blood-curdling terror. After the elderly woman had been silenced, the monster turned toward young Sammy and let out that low, ethereal laugh. Before Sammy could even think, he found himself unloading every dart that he had at the beast, causing the thing to reel back with shock. But little foam darts were no match for a large, gore-filled beast. The fleshy Snowman then charged young Sam and flung him into a nearby wall before tackling the poor boy's grandfather and consuming him right before Sammy's eyes. The little boy's eyes filled with tears at the realization that his entire family was now dead. The child began to sniffle and cry. He felt as though all was lost. Suddenly, both he and the fleshy beast were startled by 3 loud thuds outside the now closed bedroom door. The 3 loud knocks were followed by the door bursting open, slamming into the wall behind it. Accompanying the loud noise came a gust of chilling wind, along with a white frost that crept around the edges of the door and up the walls in the hallway. Then, Sammy watched as a giant figure rounded the corner. 2 giant curled horns ducked under the top of the door and into the room. These horns led down into the darkness of a big red hood that covered the beast's countenance. A red velvet robe hung down and wrapped around his body. The only thing that could be seen beneath the crimson robe were 2 large hooved feet that were connected to 2 thick legs, all covered with gray and white, matted fur. The only other thing that stuck out from beneath the darkness of the robe was 1 large, frozen blue hand with 5 extremely long, clawed, and outstretched fingers. The beast beneath the robe held out a massive hand towards young Sam, and the boy then realized the fleshy Snowman was there no longer. 1 beast had come and scared the other away. Sammy was out of the frying pan and into the fire. The poor boy thought that he was done for, but the monster did not attack. It just stood there with a hand outstretched to the child. Sammy sat there, curled up against the wall in pain and confusion. Then he remembered the pouch in his pocket, a little velvet pouch with a snowman on it that he had found within the wall. The boy reached into his pocket and retrieved the bag, before slowly placing it in the monster's giant hand. The large beast nodded its massive head. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone, and Sammy was back in his room, safe in his bed. The child looked around in shock and confusion before jumping out of bed and running back down the hallway to the guest room. All was clean and in order. He ran down the hallway and down the stairs. No dead bodies, no blood. He ran out into the kitchen. The table was empty aside from a single plate of bacon, eggs, and pancakes. Then, Sammy ran into the living room where the Christmas tree was all lit up, beautiful with several colorfully wrapped boxes sitting beneath it. All around the tree sat Sammy's family. The young boy ran and hugged his parents. He then went around and hugged everyone else, even his bully of a brother and cousin. "What's all this about all of a sudden?" Sam's dad asked.
Nothing. I'm just glad you're all here. Merry Christmas.
Sammy answered.
Hey, Sam, I think this is for you.
His mother said inquisitively, holding up a card with a little red ribbon tied to it. The card simply read, "For Sammy." Sam followed the ribbon out into the next room, back around into the kitchen, and down into the basement, where he found that the other end was attached to a large box, wrapped in bright green wrapping paper, a red bow and ribbon around it. A small card was propped up against it. Sammy picked up the card and read it.
Dear Sammy, I'm sorry about last night. You did a great job facing your fears, and I hope my friend wasn't too much trouble for you. I hope this can help make things right. Yours truly, Santa Claus.
Sammy took in a sharp breath of excitement and tore the wrapping open to reveal his gift inside, a G3000 Gatling dart blaster. It had a 500-round drum clip which could unload a lot quicker than you would think, firing an astonishing 2 rounds per second. You could empty an entire magazine within just a few minutes. A smile crept across the boy's face. He knew that things would be different now. He knew that things would be better.
Well, they say don't eat yellow snow, but I suppose the red snow should be avoided as well, unless you're a vampire vacationing in the Caribbean. But if you're looking for more Yuletide terror, no need to go far, just slay your way back here again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so I can catch you all again next Saturday.